Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I am a little bit worried about what we might unearth in the next 42 minutes, or more, of course. PMQ's on the way at 12:45. I don't know anything about the American healthcare system, and I sometimes wonder whether we're all a little bit guilty of... I'm going to refer back to Steve a lot in the course, I think, of the rest of the programme. Steve, incredibly honest call. A lot of you, as chilled by it as I was, effectively saying, I don't care that Donald Trump is a liar and or a racist because he upsets and annoys people like you. And I think we're on different sides, says Steve, who's married to an Asian woman. But we're all slightly in danger of seeing what we want to see. So I like the idea of socialised healthcare. I like the idea of my taxes as someone who earns a decent whack, nothing compared to the kind of people that invest in private health companies on a grand scale, but I do all right. And hopefully I'll stay and work long enough to carry on doing all right. I'm not going to inherit pots of cash or anything like that. And indeed, if Mum needs social care, that's where her little house in Kidderminster will go. So I'm conscious of being luckier than most, but that makes me proud to think that my taxes will go on paying for your child if your child gets really ill or if you get cancer. That's what community is to me. That's what society means. People who've got a lot more money than me, some of them hate that. They hate it. Why the hell should I pay for you? If you get cancer, I can afford to pay for me and my family out of my own pocket. That's where it comes from. So we'll charge you. We'll make a profit out of you. How much of that money goes into the pockets of shareholders, I don't know. But my first tweet on the subject from Ned talks about a $37,000 bill for his daughter's birth in America 10 years ago. And he had private birth insurance. His deductible, i.e. the excess that you can knock off the final bill, was 20%. The itemised bill included $700 for sterilising a utensil. It's on the table. Of course it is. Why else would they have bankrolled Brexit, if not to hobble the gazelle at the back of the pack so that the chasing lions can bring it down and feast upon its carcass? So, there, I just did it. Maybe I've just fallen into the trap I'm describing. Maybe it's nowhere near as bad and as scary as some of the anecdotal evidence we receive suggests. Why should we be frightened about American healthcare companies getting their hands on the NHS? And if you want to find out how likely that is, probably best to look at some of the past pronouncements of people like Nigel Farage and Liam Fox and Daniel Hannan, rather than Donald Trump's 24-hour pivot from saying yes to no, which is him in a nutshell, in much the same way as we heard a moment ago. I didn't see any protest. I did see a protest. I didn't see any protest. I did see a protest. Just watch it. Now I've pointed it out to you. He'll say black and white in the same sentence, because that way there is no objective truth. And people like Alex in Cardiff end up thinking that actually there is evidence to back up what he wants Donald Trump to have said, but the evidence is being kept from him by the MSM and its agenda, its corrupt media, something that Donald Trump tweeted about this morning on the day that we commemorate, or begin to commemorate, those that died to protect, among many other things, the freedom of the press. Marie's in Ealing. Marie, American healthcare, what can you tell us?
Yes, hi James.
Hello, Marie.
I just want to say that it scares me as well, what might be happening over here. I'm American, and I've lived in the UK for 8 years. And one of the things I just want to point out is that in America, when you get health care through a company or a corporation who you're working for,
yes,
you need to be working full-time for most companies to give you benefits, which is your health care. So that's where you can get a reduced amount of health care. So you might pay $200 a month or something for your health care. If you don't work for a company like full-time giving you benefits, then you have to pay for it yourself.
Right.
So you have to have a lot of money.
And does every company provide that? I mean, have you not got things like 0 hours contracts and gig economies in America yet? Forgive my ignorance.
No, there is some of that. But yes, so most, I would say like 99% of the companies are going to offer you a benefits package that includes insurance.
Okay.
But the thing is that over here, for me, what I really love about the NHS, amongst many things, is that I like a variety of my work. I work really hard. I make a great income. I have 3 or 4 different jobs that I do. I'm a freelancer.
Yes.
And I can do that here because I'm not tied to one corporation in order to pay for my health care. So what you give up is your freedom if you have to be owned by a corporation in order to get health care, or you have to have a lot of money to pay for your health care yourself in America. Does that make any sense?
Yes, well, of course it makes sense. You're describing your lived experience, but what I don't understand is why this fella's daughter's birth cost $37,000 even though he had insurance.
Yes, because of, like you were saying, like he said, all the deductibles and all those things that go on, and everything adds up, and then you'll only get covered for so much. And depends on what happens. I have no idea what his circumstances were, but certain things, including being pregnant, are considered pre-existing conditions.
Right.
So if you have a pre-existing condition before you have health care, you can be denied health care or only guaranteed a certain
because
amount
it's
of
like
coverage.
It's like all other interactions with insurers, isn't it? Is that they move heaven and earth to pay out as little as possible. Otherwise it's a bad business model. It's why, like we got burgled a few years ago, and I was expecting to get a cheque off them, but instead I got actual like-for-like replacement. So they found a 5-year-old laptop that was still for sale and gave me that. I was furious. I thought at least I was going to get a new laptop out of it, but that's what insurance companies do, and the shareholders would be in open revolt if they didn't.
Yes.
Oh,
now,
boy.
I've had the experience as well of having great insurance when I was in America because of the companies that I worked for and so on.
Yes.
And so I had a good experience because I could pay for it.
So would you, and it comes out of your wages, so you are paying for it even though it's dressed up as a benefits package, it's just a direction of resources. So would you have not had to pay any bills at all however ill you got?
Oh, no, I still have to pay deductibles, and I still have to pay, probably thousands here and there.
So when over 500,000 families go bankrupt every year in America as a direct result of healthcare costs, most of them would have some form of insurance.
Yes, they would, but also think about that. If you get very ill and you lose your job, you've just lost your ability to pay for your health insurance.
But this is terrifying, and forgive my naivety, but why the hell do people put up with this? How could it have become... Well, we're back to the first hour, aren't we? Barack Obama tried to improve things. Somehow, significant swathes of the American population were successfully persuaded that they didn't want better health care.
Well, people are very afraid when they hear that word socialism, and they think that that's what they get sold. Oh, this is socialism, and then they freak out and they get really scared and they don't want to.
Because they think it means Reds under the bed, it's McCarthy, echoes of communism, and in fact it means free health care for all at the point of care.
And it also means freedom to be able to work how and where you want to. So if you want to be a freelancer, you want to have 2 or 3 part-time jobs, or if you just want to have more mobility in terms of your work, you have that here, but you don't really have that there unless you have a lot of money.
Any silver lining at all? I mean, apart from win the lottery and you'll be laughing? And even then, you won't be, because you'd be better off being rich in Britain with the NHS than being rich in America with health insurance, wouldn't you? Because you'd still wouldn't be
You could pay for it. If you have tons of money, you're fine. Basically, that's what it comes down to.
And that's why the people with the most are the people shouting the loudest for it. Can we find any clips of British politicians talking in favour of introducing health insurance-based systems in this country? I'm sure there must be 1 or 2 around. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. Philip is in Edinburgh. Philip, what's going on?
Hi, I just want to say I love the NHS and I'm completely dependent on it. My issue is that I can't actually take my son over to America on holiday because it would be prohibitively expensive. The travel insurance to cover healthcare would actually cost me more than the cost of the holiday itself.
And I suppose if I've read the rules correctly, if I was writing a column for The Sun, I would now say, well, tough. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it. Life's not fair. Suck it up, snowflake, or something like that, wouldn't I?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the chances of me becoming ill are, very slim. So,
but if you did, the bill would be immense. Exactly. And that's what the insurers have to calculate, is the odds, isn't it?
Yeah, 2/3 of all bankruptcies in America are related to healthcare, and most of them are people who were, quite happy. They thought they were fully insured comprehensively. So these are people that had health insurance, thought they were fully covered, and yet they, there's limitations put on it. No, you've had enough healthcare. Oh yeah, your treatment was too expensive.
But I mean, for all its flaws and vulnerabilities, I think as we sort of discovered with the last caller, you have to think about what happens when you crash your car, don't you? Well, how does the insurer behave when you crash your car? Does the insurer move heaven and earth to make your experience as hassle-free and as pleasant as possible, or does the insurer try and cling on to as much money as they humanly can and leave you with the least
I mean, it depends
expensive
on
solution.
company.
Yes, of course it does, up to a
Some
point.
are really horrible and nasty and will do everything they can, but there's this, definitely in America, very much this libertarian attitude of, I'm absolutely fine, I'm self-sufficient, whatever, until the point where suddenly something unexpected happens, as these things do, and they realise, oh no, I am dependent on other people, I can't just be self-sufficient.
And I apologise, because I seem to come down to this question on almost every topic we discuss at the moment, but how can people not see what's happening in front of them?
I don't know. Just people are so self-focused these days.
Is it sides? We're back to Steve. I said I was going to refer to him a lot. Why do you want... Well, why are you on the other side to privatised healthcare or health insurance, an insurance-based model coming in? And Steve would say, because it upsets people like you, it upsets people... He did say that. I didn't imagine it. We'll put the clip up later. I don't get it. So how is it owning the libs by paying £50,000 for having bronchitis or a broken leg? That'll teach those pesky lefties and those immigrants that haven't immigrated, like the Mayor of London, who is neither an immigrant nor someone who has failed to integrate. Thank you, Philip. I'm sorry that you can't take your son to America. It does seem very unfair. But again, of course, I wonder what would happen here if we were to introduce anything remotely similar to this. And why would American healthcare companies want a piece of the NHS action, if not because they think they can make money out of it? And how can they make money out of it? Well, look, in the very simplest of terms, simplistic even, well, they make money out of it by directing money that currently goes on treating patients into the pockets of investors and shareholders. In the words of Joni Mitchell, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And in the words of James O'Brien, is there any British, quotes, politician, end quotes, who has spoken of his desires to see Britain go down the insurance-based model of American healthcare as a replacement for our beloved and beleaguered NHS?
I think we're going to have to think about healthcare very, very differently. And I think we're going to have to move to an insurance-based system of healthcare. Frankly, I would feel more comfortable that my money would return value if I was able to do that through the marketplace of an insurance company than just us trustingly giving $100 billion a year to central government and expecting them to organise the healthcare service from cradle to grave for us.
Treated by the NHS, of course, after that very sad plane crash that he was caught up in a few years ago. And I think he had treatment as a younger man for testicular cancer as well, or something similar, which one presumes was also on the NHS. And, of course, he's perfectly entitled to have a view about where his money goes, just as we're perfectly entitled to ask where his money comes from. And he's been given 24 hours to explain undeclared gifts to the European Parliament. I make a few predictions on this programme. Chalk this one up as 60... No, put this one up as 50-50, all right? I would not be surprised if your friend and mine, Nigel Farage, is currently acting in a way designed to get him chucked out of the European Parliament or to get him punished, because nothing would add more to the ludicrous narrative of victimhood and betrayal, would it? Just put that one down as a 50-50, floating it out there. No, not committed to it by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously if it comes true, I'll claim that it was a 100% stone-cold prediction all along. 11:36 is the time. David in Ipswich, tell us a little bit about that insurance-based system that Mr Farage is so keen to see introduced in this country.
Yeah, I think just a couple of points if I can. I mean, I haven't seen anything just yet which clarifies just how involved they want to get into the NHS, but certainly there's a big pharma business in the US, and I would fully expect that if there was any trade deal on the go, that we would be probably purchasing drugs from the US as much as we do from Europe. But they
might be cheaper. I don't know, like you, yeah. But I'm more interested in what happens in America when you need healthcare or when you get sick.
And I think you're right to actually raise this point, because a lot of people unfortunately would be ignorant to what's gone on over there. I was there from 2006, and that was at a time when it was obviously insurance, but it was a reasonable cost. I mean, it was something like I was paying about £300 a month for cover that was a company cover, but we had to contribute to it. And
but that doesn't get you everything, as from what I've learned from previous callers.
Well, yeah, like everything, there's pre-existing conditions that get excluded. That's their normal. But, insurance companies always try to do that. It's just unfortunate that that's
sure.
part and parcel of it. Hopefully, you'd like to think that you could overcome that and not allow them to behave in that way, but that's what they get away with at the minute.
Yeah, good luck.
But, I was there for 6 years, went away, had to work in a couple of different places, but came back. But by the time I came back, that £300 a month had gone up to £700 a month, and deductibles had gone to about 20% of what the fee was for the hospital, and that might not. That might sound quite reasonable. I mean, it isn't, but even if it sounded reasonable, you've got to remember that you're talking phone digit sort of growth in costs in that period. And people have said 37,000, 47 odd thousand to have a baby. I had a problem. I was in hospital for 3 hours getting something stitched back on. And that was a $17,000 bill for 3 hours in hospital.
And how much did that come out of your pocket?
Fortunately, that happened in the first stint rather than the second stint.
Oh, I see.
The second stint, I would have had to pay $3,500 of my own money.
Despite having paid hundreds of bucks a month in insurance, which is what the equivalent here would be national insurance, but then there's no excess, there's no deductibles. You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, and I apologise for making light of your plight. But what did you have to have stitched back on?
Oh, it's just a thumb. So it's just a little incident when the power tool happens. But look, the problem was that, with all the problems with Obama and how polarised their political system had become, that when they went through the global financial crisis, it was clear that, they were heading for upwards of 21, 22% of their GDP coming from healthcare. Yeah. We're about 8% here in the UK at the minute. And they didn't have any proper regulation of controlling prices. And, of course, you saw prices go up by over 40% in some cases.
What are we voting for? Well, low regulation, low taxation. That's what they want.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think if we end up subscribing to more of a healthcare system that's private-based, and don't get me wrong, I mean, they have some very fast turnarounds of patients. They have excellent equipment, really excellent hospitals, but the costs seem to outweigh those benefits.
For those that can afford them.
Exactly.
And actually, Am Incorrigible has just posted an astonishing succession of clips of Democrat politicians in the Senate introducing bills that would protect the health care of Americans with pre-existing conditions, and every single one of them being voted down and repeatedly by Republican senators. David, thank you. Refer briefly back to Steve, because you find yourself wondering why anybody would vote to have worse health care. Answer is it annoys the other side. It gets on your nerves, James. Okay, yeah, getting sick to own the libs. And speaking of things that I get personally blamed for, Paul's being in touch to say I blame people like you and organisations like LBC for this happening to the NHS. The only party that will defend it is a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party, but you're always running him down. Lib Dems are too right-wing to want to save it. Thank you for getting in touch, Paul. Don't play with scissors. Steve's in South Yorkshire. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi there. 2 points, if I can, quickly. One is... So I'm a GP.
Whereabouts in South Yorkshire are you?
Doncaster.
Oh, fantastic! If you pop into Doncaster Waterstones later today, there's a lovely display in the window of a recently published paperback. It's non-fiction book of the month. But we digress, Steve. Carry on.
Thank you. And just a point that we talk about the NHS as though it does provide everything for free, but sadly, one of the realities of being a GP nowadays is trying to treat people who can't afford their prescriptions.
So people in work, because if you're not in work, do you get them for you paid for?
No, it's nothing to do with work. So certain conditions you get them free.
Right.
So if you've got an underactive thyroid for some reason, you get every prescription.
You do.
For life, free.
Yes.
Every prescription. If you have income tax credits, etc. But there are a huge number of people now who don't fit those criteria, who you're trying to treat for example, depression or something significant, and they literally can't. I've paid for prescriptions for people, but you literally can't give them a prescription because they just say, I can't afford it, even if it's antibiotics.
Because they're living close to the breadline. That's why I just mentioned that they're in work, because
Absolutely.
the presumption would be that they weren't. And then, of course, the right-wing media would sort of begin to argue that, therefore, they deserve their plight. But I saw, I saw two people on the way into work this morning getting up outside a hotel around the corner, and they were clearly getting up to go to work. And they're sleeping outside. So that's why I mentioned it, because they're earning a wage, but there's not enough money left over at the end of the month to cover prescriptions for treatments that their doctor, in this case you, consider them in need of.
Absolutely. It is one of the saddest things about the job. And the other thing is just, I think, the damage the programmes like Benefit Street and programmes like that, where the narrative is, and I hear it all the time, sadly, the narrative is that if these people just worked a bit harder like me,
yes, of course,
then they'd be fine, wouldn't they? And I see it every day. No, that's not the case. And so I think that's partly to blame. But I just want to say the NHS isn't really. We say it's free, and it is free at the point of actual healthcare, but not medication, which I think is a really important thing.
Could you, I've got two questions for you, if you don't mind. The first is, if I don't know, you don't really have an employer, do you, in the conventional sense of the word? But if the authorities found out that you'd paid personally for a patient's prescription, would you get into trouble?
I don't think there was nothing to gain. I talked to my partners first, and it was a one-off in an extreme circumstance.
No, I hear you, and that might be the answer to my next question, which is, what is the worst case you've come across of someone not being able to afford their own prescription?
I think somebody who was not in need of urgent psychiatric care, but really needed some antidepressants, and I think that's the one where you can't wait a month.
Because, we don't need to go there, do we?
Yeah, so I just think, the NHS is great, but when people say we love the NHS, we need to take off the rose-tinted glasses sometimes.
Although, of course, a few 100 miles or so north from where you are now, all prescriptions are free in Scotland.
Exactly, yes.
But, of course, it's the bureaucrats in Brussels that make our laws. I have let you down, I think. I have failed to find any story today that we could file under light relief. I think it's important during these dark and troubled times to at least try to find a few. But it's a fairly grim news agenda. Don't worry, though. My natural charm and perky personality will keep you upbeat and Bristol fashion as we continue to contemplate the news agenda. On this occasion, the very real prospect that the forces behind Brexit are next set to target the National Health Service. Not having a Brexit conversation today, but significant numbers of people have been persuaded that they should harm themselves in pursuit of this sort of notional good that benefits nobody except very, very, very wealthy people who are concerned about tax directives coming from the European Union, concerned about regulations already in place designed to protect workers, concerned about regulations that we've just been looking at in the context of healthcare. Why would anybody not want to have... Well, look, we've got 81 trade deals, right? And we're a member of the largest trading bloc on earth. So people have been persuaded up and down the country that we should throw all that away is still partly beyond me, although I've got quite a good handle on how that it's happened. So when I say to you that the people who've persuaded a country to walk away from 81 trade deals and membership of the largest trading bloc on earth and are now eyeing up the NHS, you'd be perfectly entitled not to believe me, which is why I'm so grateful to the people who have made it absolutely clear that will be next on the agenda.
I think we're going to have to think about healthcare very, very differently. And I think we're going to have to move to an insurance-based system of healthcare. Frankly, I would feel more comfortable that my money would return value if I was able to do that through the marketplace of an insurance company than just us trustingly giving $100 billion a year to central government and expecting them to organise the healthcare service from cradle to grave for us.
11:51 is the time. Donald Trump confirmed the American ambassador's comments at the weekend that the NHS would indeed be subject to any putative trade deal, although even talked, I do wonder why we bother sometimes. There's very little point talking about a trade deal because, as Nancy Pelosi has confirmed, and I think this would hold true among many Republicans, let alone Democrats, if the Good Friday Agreement is thrown under the bus as a result of a no-deal Brexit, there's no way the Americans would go along with that. The Irish-American lobby is incredibly powerful in American politics. And I presume that crosses both houses. I don't know for sure, but I can't see why Irish-American interests wouldn't be represented by the Republicans and the Democrats as opposed to just one or the other. So, look, and then Donald Trump yesterday confirmed what Woody Johnson has said. Presumably, some arch-Brexiters would have had a quiet word with Donald Trump yesterday. I don't know if anyone met with him from that constituency of arch-Brexiters or lying toads, whatever phrase you prefer. But if anyone from that constituency did meet with him, they would have whispered in his ear, look, we're pretty close to getting no deal over the line. For God's sake, would you mind rowing back on what you said about the NHS? Because that's going to put the cat among the pigeons for the Tory leadership and for the prospect of jumping off the cliff with no parachute at the end of October. So, lo and behold, on Good Morning Britain today, Donald Trump said the opposite of what he said yesterday. 11:53 is the time. Kate is in Beverley. Kate, tell me about healthcare in America. Hello, Kate. Sorry to keep you. What would you like to say?
No, not at all. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I just wanted to give the example. My sister lives in Virginia, and her husband, a reasonably good job.
Yes.
So the company pays. So I'm not sure how much exactly, but they have to pay $2,000 for all the bills first before they can claim anything back.
So that's their initial deductible. I don't know what the language is. That's part of the problem, isn't it? Is that we're a little bit frightened of the jargon, and that somehow leaves us lying on the altar waiting to be sacrificed to the healthcare companies.
And, it says...
okay, so even if you've got insurance, if you haven't got $2,000 spare... You'll think twice before going to the doctors or going to hospital.
Absolutely, and I think I've been on doctor's appointments with her. I mean, no shadow of a doubt, it is like 5-star.
If you can afford it.
But you can, exactly. But it's staggering because they joke about it, but it's probably true that they get all of these individual bills as well, and you even get a bill jokingly from the person who opened the door for you.
They charge for absolutely everything because that's what low regulation means.
Everything is charged individually, and I think it would be a massive wake-up call for people here.
But it'll be too late. It'll be too late to realise if it happens. It'll be too late to undo it. And you've made me understand a story that I read last year, and it was in March of last year I read this. I remember it. A Massachusetts woman is drawing attention for begging people not to call an ambulance for fear of high hospital costs after she was injured in a subway accident. Video of the woman from the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority Police Department went viral over the weekend. It shows her in apparent agony after her leg was caught in a gap between a train and the platform on Friday. She begs passengers who came to her aid not to call the ambulance. She says, do you know how much an ambulance costs?
It's terrible, isn't it? It's really... and also, I think perhaps maybe the people here in Britain will realise that they should value the NHS more, and also... There are a lot of time wasters, don't show up for appointments. A
little bit of streamlining,
like
a little bit more efficiency. Although I'd remind you that when David Cameron arrived in Downing Street, the patient satisfaction in the NHS was the highest it had ever been, and there were still people not turning up for appointments then. I guess it's a question of trust, as Kate says. It's a wake-up call. It's just a question of who you trust, the people telling you the truth or the people telling you that we should move towards an insurance system, presumably because their backers stand to make some money out of it. Now, I can't think of anybody who has insurance companies who's given huge sums of money to any people on the British political stage. Can you? Just trying to think. Anyone? Just plucking numbers out of the sky. £450,000 from someone who is described as an insurance tycoon, giving that money to somebody who is on the record calling for the NHS to be replaced by an insurance-based model. Anybody? Bueller? No, I've got nothing. John's in Australia. John, what can you tell us?
Hi, James.
We would normally be a bit more specific, John, I have to be honest with you. Considering we spoke to a lady in Beverley a moment ago, a lovely town in West Yorkshire, city in West Yorkshire.
I live on the Sunshine Coast in southeast Queensland.
Lovely stuff. Carry on.
And yeah, I trained in the UK. I worked there for 3 years, and then emigrated over to Australia, and I've been out here for about 3 years now.
Lovely.
They have kind of a mixed system here with quite a robust public healthcare system, and then a private healthcare system as well.
How big's the gap? Because we're already knocking at the door of that here, but we're not going through it yet. I've discovered that you can jump queues or shorten waiting times if you are prepared to pay for individual consultations. I mean, the whole existence of Harley Street is based on that premise, isn't it, in a way? But in Australia, it's much more entrenched. So how big is the gap in treatment between people who are paying privately and people who are relying on insurer state?
So most of the hospitals here, certainly in Queensland, at least where I've worked, you'll have like two hospitals next to each other. Gosh. You'll have your public hospital and you'll have your private hospital. If you get in some sort of accident, you'll attend your emergency department. And then you have an option, if you've got private healthcare, to have your treatment in the private hospital or continue to have your treatment in the public hospital. And then your money would go to your private healthcare money. For certain insurance providers, for instance, Bupa will not pay the public system, but other insurance providers will pay that the cost of your insurance towards the public system.
I understand.
Some ways the public system in some ways benefits from it.
Yes.
I don't know how this system has been created. For me, working here, it seems that it actually works quite well, but it's certainly not superior to the NHS. In the level of care that's being, and a very high level of care, but they in terms of what the patient gets, at the point of care, you get so much more from the NHS than you would even in this system.
And when you say it may have some benefits, I understand what you mean, because it only works if the model already exists, if you see what I mean. So you've got finite resources in the for want of a better word, in the free hospital, and because those resources are finite, the idea that wealthier patients will go to the paid-for hospital next door frees up resources and shortens waiting lists in the free hospital. But you could argue that that's good for the people that can't afford to go next door. But the bottom line is that the people next door are getting better care.
Well, I wouldn't even say that. That is another subject. I actually think you're probably getting superior care in the public hospital than
so why would you go next door then?
Well, you've got probably
got more channels on your telly.
Room, maybe more channels on your telly. You have more consultant-driven care. So rather than speaking to a junior doctor like me, you'll have much closer contact with a consultant. You'll be able to pick your consultant.
But in terms of the surgery or the treatment you receive, it wouldn't necessarily be better and could actually be worse. Well, that is close to a silver lining, although it's an Australian model rather than an American one. That is what we began the hour hoping for, although, as John reminds us, it is still measurably inferior to what we already have. Oh, that sounds familiar. Julia says, we already have privatisation in the NHS. My daughter-in-law was having a baby. I won't mention the whole hospital, Julian, because I can't double-check, but I believe you, because I think we had a similar experience. I was offered a private room for £150 a night. Not offered different treatment, though, mate, to be honest. That is like paying for more TV channels or a private room. It's not quite the same, getting different healthcare, or indeed, if you haven't got 150 quid, getting turned away in the first place. But, there is, as I said at the outset, there is already two tiers here. One thing I don't understand is why it went away again. Am I going nuts? It's difficult to remember sometimes, but I'm sure private health was bigger before 97. Was that one of New Labour's achievements? I don't know, but I'm sure because I left school in 1990, I'm sure that when I was at school and for a few years afterwards, most people I know had from school, I went to an expensive school, I'm sure they had private health insurance. We had it when Dad was on the Telegraph, but he got made redundant by the Telegraph in my last year at school, and I never got ill, actually. But he did. He went into hospital, and he went into a smart Bupa hospital in Edgbaston. That was part of his deal. But then I've never really worked for anyone for about 17 years. I've been self-employed, so I don't know whether or not You get it normally now, as you certainly don't get it with normal jobs, do you? Health insurance, private health insurance would be quite a cushy job. I don't know. I'm just pointing out how little we know. Not just about our own system, but about the American system as well. And it is, of course, the American system that seems more acute. We will be catching up once again with Rachel Venables in about 10 minutes' time, just after the very next break. She is in Portsmouth for the beginnings of the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, a succession of speeches being given. We try and get some highlights of those as well, if we can. I never know what to say on days like today. I get quite emotional about the notion of sacrifice, but I also can get quite emotional about who dies and why. The Second World War, uniquely for me, was a battle between good and evil, but the more one understands about it, the more one realises that it wasn't undertaken necessarily for those reasons. We didn't go to war against Germany because of the Holocaust, because of the persecution of Jews, or indeed trades unionists and homosexuals and socialists and disabled people. We didn't really know about that in the 1930s, in the late 1930s. We went to war against Germany chiefly because they had imperialistic ambitions, which we felt threatened by. Neville Chamberlain believed that we wouldn't be threatened by them, which is why he appeased the Nazis. Winston Churchill spent a decade warning against the rise of the National Socialists, the rise of the Nazis in Germany, often unheeded, actually. Obviously, in the long run, he was proved right. But other wars, I've been thinking about this a lot, but whether or not that idea of, and I'm going to refer back to Steve's call briefly as well, because it has stayed with me today. How do you persuade people to go and die? How do you do that? Well, you have to have really deep and entrenched notions of sort of nation-state or loyalty, patriotic loyalty. The First World War, by my analysis, which is a little bit clumsy, I was taught medieval history at A-level, so I can tell you whatever you want to know about Charlemagne the Great, but I don't know as much about the origins of the First World War as I probably should, and I'm very much shaped by the poetry of that era as well, the Siegfried Sassoons and the Wilfred Owens. But it was essentially a fight between two cousins. I think, were they both grandsons of Queen Victoria? And you sort of think, why did you go and die for that? And the answer is that flag-saluting, blind, quotes, patriotism, end quotes. And that's what we're seeing a rise of, again, which is why the images from Portsmouth today are so powerful and so moving. Because you not only have representatives of the German government, but also representatives of the American, the French, and of course the British governments and many others. And that's what unity is. That's what union is. That's why some people warned that fracturing the European Union might endanger peace in Europe that's been in place among member states since 1945. Certainly that was part of Churchill's vision for a united Europe, for the future of Europe. And it's perfectly possible that this will be the last commemoration of D-Day undertaken by countries that are part of a European Union. Just putting it out there. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Looking a little bit more at what American healthcare is currently like, because I suspect we need a bit of a crash course in it if some of the ambitions and intentions of men like Woody Johnson, who someone's just told me is the heir to the Johnson & Johnson pharmaceutical empire, which is pretty impressive as well. I'm sure he's got the best interest of patients at heart, but they also have their eye on the NHS. So what is the American system like? Sam is in Streatham. Sam, what can you tell us?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Hello. It's following on from your call a couple of calls ago about the woman who was begging not to call an ambulance in America.
The plural of anecdote is not data, I have to stress, but that is a reported story with footage, so it did actually happen.
Well, this definitely happened to me. It's a slightly different take. I was working in New York last year.
Yes.
I went out for lunch, get some lunch around about Times Square, which was teeming with people. I mean, just thousands and thousands of people going backwards and forwards. And in the middle of a busy street, there was a guy in a wheelchair. There was a black guy in a wheelchair holding a cup, and everybody just walked either side of him. And I was walking past him, and I saw him slump forward. And I looked around to see if anybody else would do anything. You know, this guy, he could have died in front of all of our eyes, and people just ignored it. They ignored it completely and utterly. I was working there. I didn't know what to do. I felt horrified. I went back to where I was working. I said, there's a guy in real distress out there. He's slumped in a wheelchair. And they went, well, it's not our problem.
What are you going to do?
It's not our problem. You know, and...
I don't know that that's necessarily a reflection of the American healthcare system. It could quite conceivably have happened in Piccadilly Circus, I think.
Well,
but you'd imagine someone would phone an ambulance.
So that was exactly my point when I was ringing, just because of saying, if I had an American phone, I mean, I could have phoned 911. I don't know what I would have said, but everybody he told when I went back to work said nothing would have happened. No one would have come. I'm damn sure if I'd seen that happen in Piccadilly Circus or Leicester Square, I would have phoned an ambulance and it would have come. And that's my point. It's just that it was more the attitude of the people. The terrible thing that you saw, that people just literally walked by without doing anything. But it was also, it's simply not my problem. I believe the NHS and what we pay our taxes for here is actually what defines us. And I hope, it defines us as a society. And it's our conscience.
Because that is, I mean, it's so simple to understand, isn't it? It would simply be a phone call that you'd make. You don't have to be the Good Samaritan. You don't have to pay. You don't have to pat yourself on the back or polish your halo. You would just call 999 if you saw someone in distress. You don't even need to give your name. You don't have to give your details. You just say, there's a bloke. He's really
poor. I'm not saying it like a Good Samaritan or like a religious thing. It's simply, I see someone in distress, I do something about it, and we have a system in this country that will respond to that person in distress. And woe betide us if we try to commodify that, really.
Well, I can't say fairer than that. Thank you, Sam. 12:12 is the time. Be warned. Be careful. Theresa May currently speaking in Portsmouth at the D-Day 75th anniversary, reading a letter from a Captain Skinner who landed on Sword Beach on, 75 years ago yesterday, 1944. I don't know if you've been to Normandy. I would really recommend it. It's a very, very... struggle to find the right words to describe what it's like. The commemoration in Normandy of the D-Day landings on those beaches is permanent. It's not just annual or marking the big anniversaries like the 75th. There is a permanent commemoration of it, a permanent memorial to it. There's a bleakness to the beaches as well. There's a lack of development, presumably as a result of their historical status. So you're not going to find any penny arcades or rock shops in the way that you would on comparable coastlines just on the other side of the channel. And I wonder how significant that is as well, to be a country that fell under the jackboot of the Nazis rather than one that evaded it and then, of course, saw it off. All of these messages, all of these lessons come forth. But the footage of Theresa May reading that letter from Captain Skinner and then reading the letter sent to his widow after he had died should move the coldest heart. We'll catch up with Rachel Venables, who is there for LBC after the next break. And we may get a couple of clips from that speech as well. Before that, another... let's find out, actually. Mark is in Baltimore in America. Mark, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so you wanted to know how it works over here.
Yes.
Originally when the healthcare system came in, it's Affordable Care Act came into system here, and it was designed to help people who had pre-existing conditions. So if babies were born with problems, they couldn't get insurance. So it's not actually the Obama healthcare too. So you have a system here where you have a gold, we have a bronze, a silver, a gold, and a platinum.
Those are established things, are they?
They are.
Right, okay.
There's various providers. So the main one here is Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Okay.
You have Kaiser Permanente, but you pay more, you pay less if you have the platinum one,
right.
You pay less.
So that's a question of how likely you are to get ill.
Also how much money you have.
But why would you pay less?
Less for what?
For the best quality care.
Because mine is $750 a month, so I have bronze.
Yeah, right.
So for platinum, it might be $2,500 a month.
Right. I misunderstood you. Sorry.
I just have my deductible. So my deductible is $6,000 now. But the point is, you think, oh, that's okay. The point is that when you do have something done, you still get bills for this and that, and they come after you.
Do you ever would anyone ever go to hospital in America and not get sent a bill? If you had platinum, would you?
Well, you see, some of the hospitals have funds put away to take care of people who can't afford it. But,
right.
But people do. You can't be a hypochondriac in this country.
No, I hear you.
Yeah, but the point is that every doctor, my wife had a hip replacement, it cost her $8,000. So I went to have a cyst removed from my neck. It cost me $12,000. So they're just making things up as they go along. It's very dangerous. It's very uncaring. And what I'm really perplexed about is that Britain wants to go this way,
well, Britain
when
doesn't
America
yet.
is trying to go the other way.
Yeah, well, it is and it isn't, isn't it? I mean, it's the old tides. It's Steve's call earlier about sides. Which side are you on? The one that will annoy people who want healthcare for everyone, or the one that will prevent healthcare for everyone? What would you say, very briefly, to anybody in this country thinking of falling into line behind politicians who call for insurance-based models to be introduced here?
Get your head out your backside.
Thank you, Mark. Very apposite and pithy. Speaking of the what and the why, what is an insurance-based healthcare system as practiced currently in America, and why should British public figures, British politicians, Jeremy Hunt's on the record, by the way, as being in favour of it. When the coalition first came into power, one of the unions, I think the CWU, identified a lot of MPs who had stakes in healthcare companies. That doesn't necessarily mean that they had ambitions to see the NHS further privatised. But when Woody Johnson, the American ambassador, said on telly on Sunday that he absolutely believed that the National Health Service would be subject to any looming trade deal with America, a deal which, of course, is unlikely to happen unless they find a way of dealing with the problem of the British border in Ireland, such as the ebb and flow, such as the importance of the Irish lobby in American politics. But still, we're down a rabbit hole. We're talking about things that probably can't happen as if they could or as if they're about to, because that's the way the news has gone. One thing we can categorically do is, of course, wonder what it's like. What was it like? And it's very easy to find out. Luke's in Warrington. Luke, what can you tell us?
Hiya, James.
Hello, mate.
I just wanted to have a quick word with you, really.
You sound like my dad.
Big listener, big fan of your program and whatnot.
Thank you, mate.
So basically, I'm a health insurance broker, and I sell international private medical insurance to expatriates. And a lot of my clients are American, and every single one of them is in awe of the system that we've got in this country and how good it is and how it looks after people. And they don't have that in the States. And almost to a woman, they're jealous of the system that we've got. Yeah. Now, I know that recently Nigel Farage was espousing the merits of having an insurance-based system to take the burden off the National Health Service. If we switch to a system like that, what I would say would happen would be you'd have a lot of people who had, say, serious pre-existing conditions who wouldn't be able to move to a private system. Anybody that was healthy or had money moved to a private system and would be contributing less to the NHS, but that would be very, very profitable for insurance companies. It makes you wonder if Nigel Farage has got any connections in the insurance industry, doesn't it, really?
It does, yeah. I can't think. I'm not familiar with this Farage person that you mentioned. Is he related to? Is he related to the one that took £450,000 in alleged donations from the insurance tycoon Aaron Banks?
It might well be the same person. I don't know.
Small world, isn't it, mate? Well, I mean, aren't you turkey voting for? Well, not a turkey voting for Christmas, but couldn't you make a killing out of this then as an insurance broker?
I've no doubt.
Are you being very unfashionably altruistic and principled and thinking of others rather than yourself in the context of economics and politics? Because that's never going to catch on, Luke.
I mean, the NHS is fantastic, and I lived overseas, a long time, and you compare the system we've got here to various countries, and it really is absolutely brilliant. Obviously, the NHS isn't going to be able to pay for everything because, the demand for services is pretty much infinite, but in terms of what we've got now, it's absolutely brilliant, and why mess about with it, really? Because whatever we switch to isn't going to be as good a system. And it's going to leave a lot of people...
There must be ways in which... I've always understood the privatisation argument, which is roughly what we're talking about here, to be that if there's no consequences to profligacy in a nationalised industry. So one thinks of the old British Rail, or if you introduce commercial imperatives, then efficiencies will improve. But I don't know how you police that, mate.
I mean, I can kind of understand that. The argument with an insurance company would use would be something called utilisation.
Right.
So, for example, one of your callers before they were talking about the deductibles they've got in the States, which is the amount of money that you pay for your own treatments until coverage kicks in at 100%.
Yes.
Okay. And one of the arguments that they use would be that it actually, you know, the higher your deductible, the lower utilisation rates will be. So, for example, if you got a cough and a cold, but your deductible's $1,000, let's say, you're less likely to go to the doctor for that.
And that's why I think I've just seen a statistic. I've got 1 in 4 written down here, that the people will, even if they're quite seriously poorly, they'll postpone or resist going to seek help because they'll get hit with that bill straight away.
Right.
Oh, blimey. You got someone on the other line, Luke?
Okay, cheers.
Carry on. 12:29 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Rebecca Long-Bailey and David Liddington crossing swords in the House of Commons this afternoon during PMQs because, of course, their more senior colleagues are quite rightly in Portsmouth for these commemorations. Again, in response to the suggestion that this is the wrong day to be doing it. I don't give that. I don't know. I never know. Do you mention things just so that you can dismiss them, or does that add fuel to the fire of the thing that you're dismissing? I don't know. But my thanks to Jonathan, who's been in touch to say, of course, today is completely the right day to do it. It's marking the assembly before embarkation of the forces that were to undertake the D-Day landings. It's the date of embarkation from our shores, actually, as Jerry points out as well, from, I think, judging by his Twitter handle, from Portsmouth. The Queen is currently addressing the ceremony in Portsmouth to mark the embarkation of the D-Day forces. Trev, who is in Waterlooville, just up the road from Portsmouth, reminds me that they always do it this way round. I got distracted by a slightly irritating tweet a moment ago suggesting that they'd changed the schedule to accommodate Donald Trump. That is not true, as Trev reminds us. It was the same for the 50th and the 60th anniversaries. The focus moves tomorrow to Normandy for the actual D-Day landing. So today is a commemoration of the embarkation, the departure, the setting of sail, if you like, and tomorrow will be the proper commemoration of the landings, the D-Day landings, the beginnings of the invasion that would bring the Second World War to a close. And I'll play you the text of what Her Majesty had to say. I may play you a contribution as well from a D-Day veteran. It's hard to get this stuff bang on the money because you don't want me sitting here filling time waiting for speeches to start, and there'll be some parts of the ceremony that you won't be particularly interested in because, in words of the cliche, you had to be there. But the firing of the guns, the gun salute, all sorts of pageantry and ceremony on display today. And although some people are occasionally critical of our, what would you call it, the retrospective attitude to the Second World War. I mean, it was a bloody and horrible business. But as I said earlier, it had to be done. It's not like other wars where you can have Augustinian arguments about whether or not it was just. If we had not stood up to the Nazis, and if America had not come to our aid, then one of the vilest regimes ever to be seen on this planet would have extended its tentacles far beyond where it did and into these islands. It's 12:37. So who are we going to hear from first? I'm going to hear from Ron Jenkins, MBE, John Jenkins, I beg your pardon, MBE, who is himself a D-Day veteran. And remember that given that this is the 75th anniversary and you would be the youngest in your teens, your late teens, in order to take part, there aren't many of them left.
I was 12 years old when I landed on Gold Beach. Sorry, 23 years old. I put my age back a bit. I was terrified. I think everyone was. You don't show it, but it's there. I look back on it as a big part of my life. It changed me in a way. But I was just a small part in a very big machine. I'm honoured to be stood here today in front of so many other veterans. You never forget your comrades, because we're all in it together. It's right that the courage and sacrifice of so many is being honoured 75 years on. We must never forget.
We must never forget. And whatever your feelings about the royal family may be, Her Majesty the Queen has always played a crucial and powerful part in proceedings such as these, and today is no different.
When I attended the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the D-Day landings, Some thought it might be the last such event. But the wartime generation, my generation, is resilient, and I'm delighted to be with you in Portsmouth today. 75 years ago, hundreds of thousands of young soldiers, sailors, and airmen left these shores in the cause of freedom. In a broadcast to the nation at that time, my father, King George VI, said, "What is demanded from us all is something more than courage and endurance. We need a revival of spirit, a new unconquerable resolve." That is exactly what those brave men brought to the battle, as the fate of the world depended on their success. Many of them would never return, and the heroism, courage, and sacrifice of those who lost their lives will never be forgotten. It is with humility and pleasure, on behalf of the entire country, indeed the whole free world, that I say to you all, thank you.
Her Majesty the Queen there addressing the 75th anniversary commemorations of D-Day in Portsmouth, where a 25 strong UK military aircraft flypast is now taking place. Astonishing scenes, but I suspect we can all agree that flypasts are one thing that categorically do not work on the radio. It's 12:40. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Events rather more recent will be under discussion in about 5 minutes' time when Theo Usherwood, our political editor, joins us to pick over the bones of today's PMQs, itself featuring no PM and indeed no leader of the opposition. If we had time, I'd probably redirect your attention. I wouldn't be surprised if one or two colleagues do later in the afternoon to Esther McVeigh's interview with Nick earlier today, where she suggested that in the frankly unlikely event of her becoming Prime Minister, oh my goodness, every time you think that you've uttered the most unbelievable phrases and words that you're ever going to utter in your entire career as a political commentator, along comes something like that. It's highly unlikely, but Esther McVeigh is currently trying to become Prime Minister, and all she has to do to become Prime Minister is win the votes of a majority of about 160,000 Conservative Party members. So 80,001 people could make Esther McVeigh your Prime Minister by the end of next month. Oh, happy days. But I digress. Theo will be with us to talk over what has happened at a PMQs that has seen Rebecca Long-Bailey make her debut at the dispatch box. David Liddington's been there before, and he's quite a smooth operator, actually. So early reports that it was well worth watching may well prove to be true. I suppose it all depends upon the expertise of Theo's analysis. And speaking of analysis, the founder of the NHS should probably be added to our conversation about its value and importance when compared to those forces that would have us abandon it in favour of an insurance-based system. Nye Bevan once said, the NHS will last as long as there are folk with the faith to fight for it. We found quite a lot of those folk today. Daniel is in Twickenham. Daniel, what can you tell us?
Hey, James, how you doing?
All good. What's on your mind?
All right. Well, I got two stories about American healthcare system. I was living in New York for a long time, and now I live in Twickenham.
Okay. It's a bit of a come down.
My number one story is when I went out cycling upstate New York by myself, I fell off my bike and fundamentally broke both my wrists.
Eesh.
So, and I found myself out in the kind of like the forest area, very far away from like any city. But rather than call an ambulance, I had enough strength to basically put the bicycle on my shoulder and just walk it until I found somebody who could bring me to a train station. So I go down the state to New York.
Was it a very expensive? Was it a very expensive bicycle?
No, it's not about the bicycle. Well, yeah, it's an expensive bicycle.
Because I'm not making light of your plight, but I would have left my bike behind in those circumstances.
I had enough strength.
Carry on.
Okay,
fair enough. Iron Man on line 2 here, clearly. Carry on.
Well, anyway, because I did not want to call an ambulance because I knew what an ambulance would have cost. So then I get to the hospital.
Seriously?
They do X-rays. I get sent home. Bill comes, $2,000. I'm like, well, I have a health insurance for my wife. What's going on? And well, $2,000 just for X-rays. But anyway, That's just like,
$2,000 just for X-rays when you have health insurance.
Yes. I got health insurance through my wife. She was the one who had the 9-to-5 job. I was freelancing, doing other things. We were paying about $700 a month in health insurance. Still had to pay $2,000 to get X-rays on my wrists.
Crikey.
My second story.
Yeah.
This is about the birth of my first son. He was born in New York. He was born in a hospital in Upper West Side. We get to the hospital. First thing they do is ask credit card and everything. You give the credit card. They check if you're allowed to be in the hospital and everything. They've been notified already. Son is born, natural birth. We get sent home. Bill comes. One in our name, me and my wife Kate, $2,000, and one in my son's name. His first letter, when he first came to the world, was a bill of $2,000. So even though the birth would have cost in total about $11,000, we had to pay $4,000 out of our own pocket. And also, sorry, you still there?
Yeah, absolutely I am. I was just trying to think of something funny to say about your son's introduction to the postal service, but then I decided it would be inappropriate.
Oh, we keep that letter. I mean, that's just like, I'm going to show it to him one day. Like, look, this is your first letter to the world here. You're welcome. Yeah. And when we finally looked at the list of so what do they charge us for? It was pretty much, there was this really interesting thing. Every time the nurse would pop her head into the room and ask us if we wanted water, and she would come and give us water, she'd charge us $20 for every single time she did that.
Even if you said no.
She was doing that all the time.
Even if you said, no, we don't need any water.
Well, we were like, oh, this is really nice. We bring on the water. I mean, if I had known that we were getting charged $20, I would have put a brick in front of the door and keep her out.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway.
And because it's a business, why wouldn't they do that? It's like upselling. I mean, not to make light of it, everything went well with your son's birth, so I can be slightly flippant. It's like upselling in McDonald's. It's why wouldn't they try and supersize you? Because they get more money if they do, and that's what they exist to do, to take money. The NHS does not exist to take money off customers or patients, as we prefer to call them. Insurance companies do. Full stop, end of conversation. Daniel, what a lovely story. Thank you very much indeed.